Tonight, we continue our quiet journey, moving gently through the landscapes of the heart. There is no hurry here. There is no destination you must reach. There is only this moment, breathing softly with you. As you listen, allow your body to become lighter, as if it were resting on a calm ocean. Nothing needs to be fixed tonight. Nothing needs to be proven. You are simply invited to be present. Long ago, in a quiet valley surrounded by misty hills, there lived a teacher known not for his words, but for his stillness. People said that when he walked, even the wind seemed to slow down. One spring morning, a young student arrived at his monastery. The student was intelligent and sincere, yet his mind was always racing ahead of the present moment. He wanted to understand everything quickly. He wanted to become wise without delay. The teacher welcomed him with a gentle nod and assigned him a simple task. Each day, he was to carry water from the mountain stream to the garden. At first, the student felt disappointed. He had expected secret teachings, mysterious practices, profound philosophies. Instead, he was given buckets and silence. Every morning, he walked down the narrow path to the stream. Sometimes the path was dry and easy. Sometimes it was slippery after rain. Sometimes stones cut into his feet. Sometimes the sun burned his skin. Each day, his mind complained, "Why must I do this again? Why is the path so difficult? Why can't it be easier?" One evening, exhausted and frustrated, he approached the teacher. "Master," he said, "the path to the stream is full of obstacles. If it were smoother, my work would be peaceful." The teacher listened quietly, his eyes reflecting the fading light. Then he asked softly, "Is it the path that troubles you, or the mind that walks upon it?" The student did not know how to answer. The next morning, as he walked toward the stream, he remembered the teacher's question. For the first time, he did not try to escape the uneven stones. He felt them beneath his feet. He noticed the sound of water, the scent of wet earth, the rhythm of his own breathing. Something subtle began to change. The path had not changed, but his relationship with it had softened. Days passed. Weeks passed. Gradually, the student realized that the path was not an enemy. It was simply a path. One afternoon, he walked beside the teacher in silence. Without looking at him, the teacher said, "When you stop arguing with the road becomes part of your journey." The student felt a quiet understanding arise within him. He saw that much of his suffering had not come from the path itself, but from his refusal to accept it as it was. In our own lives, we often walk similar paths. We meet moments that feel uncomfortable, uncertain, or inconvenient. We resist them, push against them, wish them away. Yet resistance is heavy. Acceptance is light. When you allow a moment to be what it is, something inside you relaxes. The heart no longer fights reality. The mind no longer tightens around what cannot be controlled. Notice your breath now. It comes and goes without effort. You do not command it. You do not resist it. You simply allow it. In this simple rhythm, there is a quiet teaching. Life, too, is a movement that cannot be forced to stop. When you move with it instead of against it, the journey becomes gentler. Far away, beyond mountains and rivers, there once existed a small village surrounded by wide fields and silent forests. The people there loved calm days and clear skies. They believed that happiness meant stability, predictability, and control. Whenever dark clouds appeared, they grew uneasy. They feared storms, winds, and rain. They believed that anything that disturbed their routine was a threat. Over time, their fear became habit. They began to avoid change. They built their lives around the idea that nothing should disturb their comfort. But seasons do not obey human wishes. One year, the rains did not come. The soil became dry. The rivers grew thin. The fields lost their color. The villagers waited anxiously for clouds, yet when clouds finally appeared, their hearts were confused. They had spent so long fearing rain that they had forgotten how to welcome it. Among them lived an old traveler who had seen many lands and many seasons. He watched the villagers with quiet eyes. One evening, as the first drops of long-awaited rain touched the earth, the villagers stood behind their doors, unsure whether to rejoice or complain. The old traveler stepped into the open field. He lifted his face to the sky. He allowed the rain to touch him without resistance. Children watched him with curiosity. Slowly, one child stepped outside. Then another. Soon, laughter filled the air, mixing with the sound of falling rain. The villagers began to remember something they had forgotten, that what feels uncomfortable may also be what sustains life. Rain did not arrive to punish them. It arrived to nourish the earth. In the same way, many experiences in life arrive not to harm us, but to help us grow. Moments of sadness teach us tenderness. Moments of uncertainty teach us humility. Moments of difficulty teach us strength. When we reject these moments, we reject part of life itself. Acceptance does not mean seeking pain. It means allowing reality to exist without adding unnecessary struggle. When you stop fighting what is already here, you discover that much of your suffering was created by resistance, not by reality. Let this understanding rest gently within you. There is nothing you must change tonight. There is nothing you must fix. Somewhere in the high mountains, monks once created patterns from grains of colored sand. They worked slowly, silently, placing each grain with care. They knew that when the pattern was complete, it would not remain forever. Yet they did not rush. They did not hold back their devotion. When the time came, they gently swept the sand away, returning it to the earth. A young monk watching this felt sorrow. "How can you destroy something so beautiful?" he asked. The elder monk replied softly, "Beauty is not lost when form disappears. Beauty lives in the moment it was created." The young monk realized that clinging to form had created his pain. When he allowed change to exist, the pain dissolved into quiet understanding. Everything in life moves. Everything changes. Nothing can be held forever. And yet, within change, there is freedom. When you stop trying to freeze moments, you begin to truly live them. When you stop demanding permanence, you begin to appreciate presence. The night sky changes, yet its vastness remains. Your thoughts change, yet awareness remains. Your emotions rise and fall, yet something deeper within you stays calm and open. Rest in that deeper space now. Let the body soften. Let the mind loosen its grip. You do not need to hold life tightly. You can hold it gently. In another quiet garden, an old master tended simple plants year after year. He watered them, pruned them, and watched them grow. When flowers bloomed, he smiled. When they withered, he smiled as well. A young student once asked him, "Why are you not sad when your plants die?" The master replied, "They did not come to stay forever. They came to teach me how to love without possession." The student slowly understood that attachment creates fear, and acceptance creates peace. As you lie here listening, you are invited to practice the same gentle wisdom. You do not need to control your thoughts. You do not need to force your feelings away. You do not need to hurry toward sleep. Simply allow this moment to be what it is. Breath enters. Breath leaves. Thoughts appear. Thoughts fade. You remain. And in this quiet remaining, there is nothing missing, nothing wrong, nothing urgent. Only the soft unfolding of life, moving gently, like water flowing through the night. More than anything else, Kenji felt uneasy about time. He thought often about aging, about endings, about all the things he feared he might never complete. The future felt like a quiet shadow following him wherever he went. One morning in early spring, while he was helping in the garden, he noticed that the master was paying special attention to a small cherry tree near the edge of the path. It was not the largest tree, nor the tallest. Yet the master cared for it with unusual tenderness. The tree had been planted many years ago, in memory of the master's own teacher. Each spring it opened pale blossoms like soft clouds of light. Each autumn its leaves turned deep shades of red and gold before returning to the earth. As they worked side by side, Kenji spoke gently. "Master," he asked, "do you not feel sorrow knowing that this beautiful tree will one day fade? Do you not wish it could bloom forever?" The master continued spreading soil around the roots, his movements slow and calm. Then he looked at Kenji and asked, "When you look at this tree, what do you truly see?" Kenji thought for a moment. "I see something precious that cannot last," he said. "Something beautiful that time will eventually take away." The master nodded slightly. "And what else do you see?" Kenji looked again. He noticed the small buds forming on the branches. "In a few weeks," he said softly, "it will be covered with blossoms." "Yes," the master replied. "And what else?" Kenji observed more deeply. He imagined the roots beneath the soil, unseen yet strong. He remembered the many springs the tree had already offered. He felt the quiet strength of its trunk, the gentle reach of its branches. Finally, he said slowly, "I see that it is alive right now. It is not trying to be anything else. It is simply being what it is in this moment." The master smiled. "The tree does not worry about autumn while preparing for spring," he said. "It does not hold back its blossoms because winter will come. It gives itself fully to each season as it arrives. It moves with the rhythm of appearing and disappearing without resistance." They worked in silence for a while. The sound of birds drifted through the air. The master spoke again, his voice almost like a whisper. "I have cared for this tree for many years," he said. "I have seen it through storms and droughts, through abundance and hardship. I know that one day it will complete its journey. When that day comes, I will return it to the earth with the same love I gave it while it was growing." Kenji felt a quiet trembling in his chest. "But how can you speak of that without sorrow?" he asked. The master looked at him kindly. "Who says I feel no sorrow?" he replied. "When we love something temporary, sadness is natural. But I do not let the knowledge of endings prevent me from loving fully in the present. I do not let the thought of autumn steal the joy of spring." The master brushed soil from his hands and stood quietly beside the tree. "This tree teaches me how to live," he said. "How to offer myself completely to this moment without fear of loss. How to love deeply without demanding permanence. How to find freedom not by resisting change, but by moving with it." As the weeks passed, The cherry tree opened into full bloom. Kenji watched the master sit beneath its branches each morning. He did not try to preserve the blossoms. He did not grasp at their beauty. He simply received their presence with gratitude. When the petals fell and covered the ground like soft pink snow, the master gathered them gently and returned them to the soil. There was no regret on his face, only quiet appreciation for what had been and calm openness to what would come next. When autumn arrived, Kenji prepared to leave the monastery. Before departing, he asked one final question. "How can I carry this teaching with me?" he said. "How can I live like the tree when I am afraid of losing what I love?" The master walked with him to the garden gate. The cherry tree stood radiant in autumn light, every leaf glowing with color. "Hold this image in your heart," the master said. "This tree has never been more beautiful than it is now, standing on the edge of change." It teaches us that endings can be as graceful as beginnings when we meet them without resistance. "And remember this," he continued softly, "the roots of this tree rest in soil formed by countless trees that came before it. Nothing is ever truly lost. Everything that lives, loves, and fades becomes part of a greater unfolding." Kenji listened in silence. "Your fear of impermanence," the master said, "comes from believing you are separate from this flow. But you are not separate. You are carried by it. You belong to it." As Kenji walked down the mountain path, something within him softened. For the first time, he felt a quiet sense of belonging to the rhythm of life. He sensed that he could love deeply without needing to make anything permanent. He felt peace in knowing that he was part of the endless dance of appearing and disappearing. This story offers another way to understand impermanence, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived experience. The master did not find peace by denying endings. He found peace by loving within the reality of change. Because he knew the blossoms would fall, he truly saw them while they bloomed. Because he understood that time was limited, he treasured each season more fully. Acceptance did not make his love smaller. It made his love clearer, freer, and deeper. This is the quiet paradox of impermanence. When we stop trying to make temporary things permanent, we become more present with them while they are here. When we accept that everything changes, we can love without constant fear of loss. Sadness does not disappear when things end, but it no longer overwhelms the heart. It becomes part of the natural rhythm of love. From this understanding arises a gentle courage. The courage to love fully, even knowing that change is inevitable. The courage to bloom in whatever season you are in, without holding back. Life is not precious because it lasts forever. It is precious because each moment happens only once. Each breath is unique. Each encounter is unrepeatable. When the monks dissolved their sand mandalas, they were not dismissing beauty. They were honoring it. They were showing that beauty does not need permanence to be complete. When the master loved the cherry tree while accepting its eventual fading, he was not detached. He was loving it exactly as it was, a temporary flowering in the vast garden of existence. As your breath becomes slower, and your body sinks more deeply into rest, allow yourself to release the need to hold anything tightly. You do not need to make this moment last forever. You only need to be here with it. Let yourself appreciate what is present, without demanding guarantees from the future. Let yourself love, without insisting on permanence. Let yourself live gently, within the quiet truth of change. To live like the tree is to bloom when it is time to bloom, and to release when it is time to release. To trust the seasons of your own life without trying to control their timing. To give yourself fully to this moment while holding tomorrow lightly. In accepting impermanence, you do not lose anything real. You lose only the exhausting illusion that you were meant to make temporary things eternal. What you gain is subtle, yet immeasurable, freedom from constant fear of loss, the ability to love without anxiety, the capacity to see beauty without needing to possess it, and a quiet trust in the natural flow of life. As we move deeper into this journey together, we arrive at something many people find even more difficult than accepting change: learning to meet yourself with kindness. There is a voice inside each of us. Sometimes it encourages. Sometimes it criticizes. Sometimes it whispers that we are not moving fast enough, not doing enough, not becoming enough. Buddhist wisdom invites us to listen to this voice differently. High in the mountains, in another monastery, lived a young monk named Dogen. He had come seeking peace and clarity. He had studied many teachings. He understood the words of wisdom. He believed he was ready to embody the calm presence he admired in his teachers. Dogen practiced with great effort. He woke before dawn to meditate. He kept silence. He lived simply. He tried to cultivate the stillness he believed a true practitioner should possess. Yet his mind did not follow his intentions. During meditation, instead of quiet clarity, his thoughts moved endlessly. He replayed memories, imagined conversations, worried about whether he was practicing correctly. Each time he noticed his mind wandering, he forced himself back to his breath, only to discover moments later that he was lost in thought again. The more this happened, the more frustrated he became. He watched other monks sitting motionless and assumed they had reached states of deep peace. Compared to them, he felt inadequate. After difficult meditation sessions, his mind filled with harsh judgments. I cannot concentrate. I keep moving. I am failing. I will never understand this path. Slowly, Dogen realized that he was creating two forms of suffering. His mind wandered, and he punished himself for wandering. One morning, after a particularly restless meditation, he approached his teacher, an elderly monk named Ijo. He bowed and spoke honestly. "Master, I practice every day, but my mind remains chaotic. I cannot maintain focus. Others seem naturally calm. I fear I am not suited for this path." Ijo listened quietly. When Dogen finished, the teacher remained silent for a long moment. Then he asked gently, "When you notice that your mind has wandered, what do you feel first?" "I feel disappointed," Dogen replied. "Sometimes angry at myself." "And do these feelings help your mind become more peaceful?" Ijo asked. Dogen paused. "No," he admitted softly. "They make everything more difficult." Ijo nodded. "Tell me," he continued, "when a child learns to walk and falls, what happens?" "They stand up and try again," Dogen said. "Do they scold themselves for falling?" Ijo asked. "No," Dogen answered. "And if someone constantly told the child that falling meant failure, how would that affect their learning?" Understanding slowly dawned in Dogen's eyes. It would make learning harder. It would create fear. Ijo smiled gently. "And who has been the harshest judge of your practice?" "I have," Dogen said quietly. "And has this judgment helped you grow?" Ijo asked. Dogen lowered his eyes. "No," he said. The teacher spoke softly. "You came here seeking peace, Yet you have treated your own mind like an enemy. You expected yourself to achieve in months what others learn over years. This is not wisdom. It is cruelty disguised as effort. They sat in silence while these words settled. Then Ijo continued, "True meditation is not about forcing the mind into stillness. It is about building a gentle relationship with whatever appears in the mind. When thoughts arise, notice them with curiosity rather than blame. When attention wanders, guide it back as you would guide a friend home." Dogen hesitated. "But if I accept wandering, will I ever become focused?" Ijo looked at him kindly. "Have you noticed that your mind wanders?" "Yes," Dogen said. "And this noticing," Ijo asked softly, "is it not awareness?" Dogen paused. He had never seen it that way. "Each time you notice wandering," Ijo said, "you are already awake. The wandering is not the problem. The war against wandering is the problem." Ijo offered a simple practice. "For 1 week," he said, "do not try to stop your thoughts. When you notice them, greet them kindly. Say quietly, 'Hello, thinking.' Then return gently to your breath." Dogen tried this practice. When he caught himself worrying, he whispered, "Hello, worrying." When he noticed planning, he whispered, "Hello, planning." Slowly, something changed. His thoughts did not disappear, but they lost their harshness. Meditation began to feel less like a battle and more like a gentle conversation. This kindness extended beyond meditation. When he made mistakes in daily life, he no longer attacked himself. He observed with softness and adjusted without self-hatred. After some time, Dogen returned to Ijo. "My mind still wanders," he said, "but I suffer less. I see now that fighting my mind created more pain than the wandering itself." Ijo smiled. "You have discovered something important," he said. "The awareness that notices wandering was always present. You were simply too busy fighting to recognize it." This teaching reveals a quiet truth. Often, the part of us that notices our struggles is already awake. But harsh self-judgment creates so much noise that we cannot hear this deeper awareness. When we fight ourselves, we create layers of suffering. Self-compassion opens another path. It does not mean abandoning growth. It means creating an inner space where growth can unfold naturally. Just as a tree grows best in gentle soil, the mind grows best in kindness. As you listen now, allow these stories to settle softly within you. You do not need to perfect yourself tonight. You do not need to silence your mind. You do not need to become anything other than what you already are. Simply breathe. Simply rest. Simply allow this moment to be what it is. And in this gentle allowing, something within you begins to heal, without effort, without struggle, like a quiet flower opening in the dark. This intimacy also includes awareness of your limits, your habits, your unfinished places of growth, all held within a spacious field of acceptance rather than conflict. As Dogen slowly realized, kindness toward oneself does not lead to stagnation. Instead, it releases energy that had been trapped in inner struggle and returns it to life. When you no longer spend your strength fighting your own humanity, that strength becomes available for clarity, learning, and genuine change. Notice what happens in your body when you imagine treating yourself with the same patience you would offer a dear friend who is suffering. Notice how your breath softens. Notice how the tightness in your chest or shoulders begins to loosen when criticism gives way to gentleness. In a temple surrounded by quiet gardens and flowing streams, there lived a teacher named Mayan. She was known throughout the region for her wisdom and compassion. Students traveled far to sit with her, drawn by stories of her calm presence and deep understanding of the Dharma. Yet those who lived closest to her knew something rarely spoken aloud. Despite many years of practice and teaching, Mayan still experienced moments of doubt. At times, she questioned whether her understanding was truly clear. At times, she wondered whether her guidance was helping or confusing her students. At times, she felt like an ordinary person pretending to be wise. For many years, she kept these doubts hidden. She believed that a true teacher should have moved beyond uncertainty. She feared that admitting confusion would weaken her ability to guide others. So she carried her doubts quietly, sharing them with no one. One autumn, a young student named Sato arrived at the temple. She was intelligent and devoted, but she was also relentlessly hard on herself. During their daily conversations, Sato spoke of her meditation struggles with deep shame. She described her wandering thoughts, her emotional reactions, her inability to maintain calm with a voice filled with self-reproach. "Teacher," she said one day, "I meditate every day, yet I still feel anger and jealousy. I study the teachings, but I do not feel the peace they describe. Others seem to understand what I cannot. Perhaps something is wrong with me." Mayan responded gently, reminding her that growth takes time, that difficulty is part of the path, that comparison often creates unnecessary suffering. Yet Sato's inner harshness did not soften. As Mayan listened to her student, she recognized something painful and familiar. Sato's voice of self-judgment echoed the same voice Mayan had carried within herself for years. The teacher understood that she could not truly guide her student toward self-compassion while secretly practicing self-criticism. One evening, as rain began to fall softly on the temple roofs, Mayan made a quiet decision. During their next meeting, when Sato again spoke of her doubts with embarrassment, Mayan responded with unexpected honesty. "Sato," she said gently, "I want to share something I have never told any student. Even after many years of practice, I still experience doubt. Even this morning, I wondered whether I had any wisdom to offer." Sato looked up in surprise. She had believed that teachers were free from such struggles. Mayan continued softly, "For a long time, I thought that doubt meant something was wrong with me. I believed that mature practitioners should always feel certain. But I have begun to see that my shame about doubt created more suffering than the doubt itself." Sato listened silently. "But if even you feel uncertain," she asked, "how can any of us hope to find peace?" Mayan smiled gently. "That is the misunderstanding," she said. "Doubt is not the enemy. Doubt can be wisdom. It keeps us humble. It prevents arrogance. The problem is not doubt itself, but believing that doubt means failure." She settled more comfortably on her cushion, her formal posture softening into something intimate and human. "When I treat my uncertainty with kindness," she said, "it becomes less heavy. It no longer defines my worth or my practice. I can acknowledge doubt without believing I am lost." Sato asked quietly, "How do you do that?" "I speak to doubt as I would speak to a worried friend," Mayan replied. "When the voice arises that says, 'You do not understand enough,' I answer inwardly, 'Yes, doubt is here.' That is natural. Everyone on this path experiences it." The doubt did not disappear, but Mayan's relationship with it transformed. Sato sat in silence, absorbing this teaching. After a while, she asked, "Does kindness toward yourself make you less motivated to grow?" Mayan smiled. "On the contrary," she said, "when I stopped fighting my humanity, I discovered more energy for real learning. When I stopped demanding an ideal timeline for my growth, I could finally see the progress that was already happening." In the weeks that followed, Mayan began sharing more of her own journey with Sato. She spoke of times when her meditation felt empty, moments when she struggled with teachings, and situations where her own wounds were revealed through difficult encounters. She shared these experiences not as failures, but as natural expressions of an ongoing path. "I once believed awakening meant the end of struggle," she said one evening. "Now I see that awakening may be less about eliminating difficulty and more about meeting difficulty with wisdom and kindness." This perspective slowly transformed Sato's practice. Instead of meditating to eliminate unwanted experiences, she began to sit with curiosity. When jealousy appeared, she no longer condemned it. She observed it gently. "Jealousy is here," she would note. "How does it feel? What thoughts accompany it? How long does it stay?" Her emotions did not disappear, but they lost their burden of shame. Without the added suffering of self-judgment, feelings moved through her more freely, like clouds passing through a wide sky. To both teacher and student, something surprising happened. This gentle approach did not slow Sato's growth. It deepened it. When she stopped fighting herself, her awareness became clearer. When she stopped measuring her worth by emotional states, she could explore her inner world with genuine curiosity. Months later, Sato approached Mayan with a quiet realization. "Teacher," she said, "I think I understand something. I have been trying to become someone worthy of compassion instead of practicing compassion for who I already am. I believed I had to earn kindness through improvement. But self-compassion is not a reward. It is the ground on which real growth stands." Mayan nodded slowly. "And what else have you seen?" she asked. Sato reflected for a moment. "My harsh self-judgment was a kind of pride," she said. "I assumed I should be different from who I am. Self-compassion is more humble. It accepts that I am a human being learning slowly, making mistakes, growing in uneven ways like everyone else." Mayan smiled. "And how has this changed your relationship with others?" Sato answered softly. "I am less judgmental of others because I am less judgmental of myself. When I see someone struggling, I recognize my own struggles in them. It creates connection instead of comparison." From that time on, Mayan began teaching with greater openness. She did not hide her ongoing learning, nor did she diminish her role as a guide. Instead, she embodied the very compassion she encouraged in others. Gradually, the atmosphere of the temple changed. Students became more honest about their difficulties. Teachers acknowledged their own areas of growth. The community learned to practice acceptance not as an ideal, but as a living reality. Years later, when Sato became a teacher herself, she often shared the lessons she had learned from Mayan. "Self-compassion is not a consolation for those who fail," she would say. "It is the condition that makes true understanding possible." This story reveals something essential. Mayan's willingness to acknowledge her struggles did not weaken her wisdom. It revealed the quality that made her teaching authentic, the ability to meet experience with kindness rather than judgment. By releasing the effort to appear perfect, she freed energy that had been trapped in self-protection. That energy became presence, clarity, and depth. Her honesty also allowed others to meet themselves more truthfully. Self-compassion here is not indulgence. It does not avoid responsibility or deny the need for growth. It creates the inner safety that makes honest transformation possible. When fear and shame dissolve, clear seeing becomes possible. Sato's ability to observe jealousy with curiosity allowed her to understand its patterns. She could see what triggered it, how it felt in her body, how it rose and faded. This clarity would have been impossible if she had continued to attack herself for feeling jealousy. Here lies a quiet paradox. Acceptance becomes the foundation of change. Not because you try to change, but because acceptance opens space for wisdom to arise. When you stop fighting your present experience, you gain the freedom to respond to it skillfully. The story also shows how self-compassion shapes relationships. When Mayan stopped hiding her struggles, she became more capable of guiding others. When Sato softened toward herself, she naturally softened toward others. Inner relationships and outer relationships mirror each other. When you treat yourself harshly, you often judge others harshly. When you meet your own mistakes with kindness, you begin to meet others with understanding. True humility means accepting your place in the natural rhythm of learning. This acceptance does not weaken effort. It makes effort realistic, sustainable, and wise. Every moment offers an opportunity to meet yourself with kindness instead of judgment. Not because you must, but because you can. Rest now in this understanding. Growth unfolds naturally when it is not obstructed by harsh self-criticism. Awareness deepens when it is supported by gentleness. Acceptance of what is already here creates space for new possibilities to emerge. Not through force, not through struggle, but through the quiet easing of resistance. As we continue our journey together, we begin to explore another subtle truth: how accepting others as they are opens the door to deeper connection more than any attempt to change them ever could. In a mountain village, there stood a small temple led by a patient master named Hakwin. For many years he had taught meditation and Dharma to travelers and villagers alike. Most students stayed for a season, learned what they needed, and returned to their lives with gratitude. But one student was different. His name was Jishin. For nearly 3 years, he had returned again and again to the temple. Unlike others, he questioned everything. When Hakwin spoke of letting go, Jishin argued that attachment was necessary for love. When the master spoke of impermanence, Jishin insisted that some feelings should never change. During meditation, he shifted restlessly, sighed loudly, and sometimes left before the session ended. When others shared insights, Jishin often responded by explaining why their understanding was incomplete. His presence created tension in the community. Many students approached Hakwin privately. They expressed frustration. They suggested that Jishin might not be ready for these teachings. Some even hinted that he should be asked to leave. Hakwin listened quietly, but he did not send Jishin away. Instead, he continued teaching as usual. When Jishin argued, he listened and continued calmly. When Jishin disrupted meditation, he remained still. Some students were puzzled by this approach. Yet over time, they began to notice something subtle. Hakwin's acceptance of Jishin was itself a teaching. One evening, after a particularly difficult session, a senior student named Endo approached the master. "Master," he said, "I do not understand your approach. Jishin's behavior disrupts everyone. Would it not be more compassionate to guide him elsewhere? Hakwin walked slowly along the garden path. Tell me, Endo, he asked softly, when you meet someone difficult in daily life, what do you do? I try to avoid them, Endo replied. If I cannot, I end the interaction quickly. And does this make you more patient with difficult people? Hakwin asked. Endo reflected. No, he admitted. I become more sensitive to irritation. Hakwin nodded. So you avoid difficulty in daily life, then come here hoping to cultivate equanimity. How can you learn peace among difficult people if you only practice among easy ones? They walked in silence. But, Master, Endo said, surely there is a difference between accepting someone and allowing disruption. Hakwin stopped beside a quiet pond, where the evening light rested on still water. Tell me, he asked gently, when Jishin argues, what happens in your mind? I feel frustrated, Endo said. My attention leaves my breath. I focus on him instead of myself. Hakwin looked at the water without speaking. And in that silence, Endo began to sense that the Real teaching was not about Jishin at all, but about the movements of his own mind. So you began to see that Jishin's behavior was not merely a disturbance, but a mirror revealing places where your own calm was still learning to mature. Endo reflected on this quietly, with a hint of reluctance. Yes, he admitted softly, I can see that now. Then perhaps, the Master said gently, he is not taking something from your practice, but offering something to it. If you only meditate among people who are perfectly still, how will you learn to remain aware when life is noisy? Over many evenings, their conversations continued beneath the quiet sky. Slowly, Endo began to understand the depth of his teacher's perspective. Hakwin explained that Jishin's questioning nature was not a flaw to be erased, but a way of learning that sought clarity through challenge. Some people grow by accepting ideas quickly. Others must wrestle with uncertainty before insight can take root. Jishin is not trying to create conflict, Hakwin said softly. He is trying to understand. His doubts are not weapons. They are doors he does not yet know how to open. If I dismiss him, the Master continued, he learns nothing. If I force him to accept teachings he has not yet digested, his understanding will remain shallow. Endo hesitated. But what about the other students? He asked. That depends, Hakwin replied, on how they choose to meet him. If they use his presence as a chance to cultivate patience and compassion, he becomes their teacher. If they spend their time wishing he were different, they create their own suffering. Months passed, and something subtle began to change. Jishin's arguments grew quieter and more thoughtful. He listened longer before speaking. His questions became less combative and more sincere. During meditation, his body gradually softened. Though he sometimes still left early, he did so gently, without disturbing others. At the same time, the other students noticed changes within themselves. Those who had once felt the most irritation found that their patience in daily life had deepened. They reacted less strongly to difficult coworkers, listened more openly to family members, and remained calmer in tense situations. One evening, as lanterns glowed softly in the temple courtyard, Endo shared his realization with the Master. Master, he said quietly, I think I understand now. Jishin was never the problem. Our reactions to him were the real lesson. Hakwin smiled. And what else have you discovered? He asked. That trying to change others is exhausting, Endo replied. and rarely effective. But using difficult encounters as opportunities to practice patience actually transforms the heart. Yes, the master said gently. And what more? That Jishin himself changed when he felt accepted rather than judged. When we stopped resisting him, he no longer needed to defend himself so fiercely. Hakuan nodded slowly. You have seen that acceptance often creates space for natural transformation, while force creates resistance. Years later, when Endo became a teacher, he often shared this lesson with his own students. Difficult people, he would say, are not obstacles on the spiritual path. They are invitations. They show you whether your calm is real or only an idea. This story reveals something quiet but profound. When we try to control others, our peace becomes fragile. When we learn to accept them, our peace becomes rooted. The students' frustration with Jishin had revealed their own hidden reactivity. Whenever someone awakens strong emotions in you, that reaction points to a place where awareness can deepen. Instead of seeing such people as problems, you can begin to see them as teachers. The master understood a truth that often feels counterintuitive. Resistance strengthens what it opposes. When we push against someone's difficult qualities, those qualities often become more rigid. But acceptance creates space. And within that space, defensive patterns can slowly soften. Acceptance does not mean tolerating harm. Sometimes boundaries are necessary. You can limit contact without hatred and choose distance without bitterness. Boundaries born from clarity are gentle. Boundaries born from anger are heavy. Jishin's transformation showed how people often relax when they feel understood rather than judged. Much difficult behavior grows from feeling unseen. When that pressure dissolves, the heart begins to open. Practicing acceptance with challenging people deepens your capacity for compassion in all relationships. If you can remain centered around someone who triggers you, remaining calm around easier people becomes effortless. Challenging relationships become training grounds for the qualities you wish to embody. In the same mountain region, there lived an elderly woman named Grandmother Suki. She had practiced Zen quietly for most of her life and was known for her warmth and practical wisdom. People visited her small home to seek guidance about family, work, and inner struggles. Yet there was one neighbor who tested her patience daily. Mr. Tanaka lived next door. He carried strong opinions about everything. He criticized neighbors, complained about politics, argued with shopkeepers, and lamented every change in the village. Each morning, he stood in his garden, announcing his observations to anyone within earshot. The young people have no respect, he would say. The market prices are absurd. The world is going in the wrong direction. Most neighbors avoided him politely. But Grandmother Suki could not easily avoid him. For years, she tried different ways of responding. At first, she argued with him, offering alternative viewpoints. This only fueled his desire to debate. Then she tried agreeing with him, hoping conversations would end quickly. Instead, he complained even more. Later, she practiced what she believed was detachment, responding with minimal words and emotional distance. But she noticed that this made her feel closed, not peaceful. One spring morning, as she tended her garden while Mr. Tanaka complained as usual, a quiet insight arose within her. She realized that she had been trying to manage his behavior. But what if she simply accepted him as he was? What if she listened to his words as she listened to the wind or birdsong, sounds that did not require resistance? That morning, when Mr. Tanaka criticized the noise of distant construction, Suki tried something new. She listened fully, without arguing, agreeing, or withdrawing. She sensed that beneath his harsh tone lived worry and confusion. When he paused, she said softly, "It sounds like many things are troubling you." He looked at her with surprise. "Well, yes," he admitted. "Everything feels more difficult these days." "That must feel heavy sometimes," she replied gently. For the first time, his voice softened. "It does," he said quietly. "I don't understand the world anymore." In that moment, something opened between them. Suki realized that his constant complaining was his way of navigating fear and uncertainty. His criticism was vulnerability in disguise. Over the following weeks, she continued practicing simple acceptance. Instead of resisting his negativity, she listened for the feelings beneath it. When he criticized children, she heard loneliness. When he complained about change, she heard grief. Slowly, something unexpected happened. As Suki stopped resisting him, Mr. Tanaka began to share more honestly. His complaints turned into stories of worry, memories of the past, and quiet expressions of longing. His tone remained critical, but it softened. Even more surprising to Suki was the change within her own heart. She no longer felt drained by their conversations. Instead, she felt a gentle appreciation for his sincerity. She also noticed that her patience with others had deepened. When people expressed negativity, she responded with curiosity rather than irritation. One autumn evening, as they spoke across the garden fence, Mr. Tanaka asked quietly, "Suki, you always seem calm when I talk about my problems. How do you stay peaceful when everything is changing so fast?" She paused before answering. "I think I've learned," she said softly, "that most people are simply trying to find their way through confusion and difficulty. Meditation helps me listen to what people feel, not only to how they speak." He was silent for a long moment. "I know I complain a lot," he said. "It must be annoying." "You speak your worries honestly," she replied. "That takes courage. Many people hide their struggles behind smiles." He considered this quietly. "Everyone has a different way of facing uncertainty," Suki continued. "Some withdraw into silence. Some stay constantly busy. You think aloud. None of these ways are wrong. They are simply different paths." From that day forward, Mr. Tanaka still complained, but he also began to notice small joys. He still worried about change, but he sometimes expressed curiosity instead of only criticism. Suki had discovered a quiet truth. When you stop trying to reshape someone's nature and begin listening for the deeper needs within it, connection becomes possible. Acceptance does not mean agreement. It does not mean allowing harm. It means meeting reality without hostility. And in that gentle meeting, something within both people begins to soften. It means seeing the human being beneath the patterns that seem difficult to endure. It means responding to the heart behind the behavior, rather than reacting only to the surface of what is expressed. Many years later, when people came to grandmother Suki seeking guidance about difficult relatives or challenging neighbors, she often spoke of her experience with Mr. Tanaka. "Most people are not trying to be difficult," she would say softly. "They are expressing pain, fear, or confusion in the only language they know. If you listen for what they truly need, rather than focusing on how unpleasant their expression feels, something unexpected can begin to heal." Her story revealed how acceptance transforms relationships quietly, from within. When Suki stopped trying to control Mr. Tanaka's behavior and began simply receiving his words, everything shifted, even though his basic personality remained unchanged. The essential insight was simple yet profound. People often become easier to live with when they feel heard rather than judged. Mr. Tanaka's complaints served a purpose in his life. They were his way of making sense of a world that felt overwhelming and unfamiliar. When Suki recognized this and responded with understanding instead of resistance, he felt safe enough to share softer emotions that had long remained hidden. Acceptance does not guarantee that every difficult person will change. Some patterns are deeply rooted and may persist regardless of how gently you respond. Yet your experience of being with them can change dramatically when you stop fighting their nature and begin working with reality as it is. Notice how Suki's practice strengthened her patience in every relationship. This is one of the quiet gifts of accepting difficult people. They teach skills that enrich every interaction. Patience cultivated in challenging encounters naturally flows into easier relationships as well. Her story also reveals the difference between acceptance and agreement. Suki did not suddenly believe that all of Mr. Tanaka's criticisms were correct. She simply stopped resisting his tendency to express dissatisfaction. She learned to acknowledge his feelings without taking responsibility for solving every problem he described. This distinction is essential. You can accept that someone sees the world pessimistically without becoming pessimistic yourself. You can recognize that someone is critical without defending yourself against every criticism. You can understand that someone processes emotions differently without trying to reshape their inner world. Acceptance in relationships often requires releasing the fantasy that others will meet all your needs or behave exactly as you wish. Instead, you begin to appreciate what people truly offer, while no longer demanding what they cannot give. Mr. Tanaka could not provide light, cheerful conversation like some people could, but he offered honesty about human struggle, and in its own quiet way, that honesty was meaningful. He reminded Suki that life includes difficulty, and that acknowledging difficulty does not have to lead to despair. The practice of acceptance also includes recognizing that everyone is doing the best they can with their current understanding and emotional capacity. This does not excuse harmful actions, but it creates a foundation for responding with wisdom rather than reactive judgment. Sometimes the most compassionate response is honest communication about how someone's behavior affects you. Yet such communication becomes healing only when it arises from a wish to understand, not a demand to control. There are moments when your words make me feel distant is different from, you are too negative and must change. The first opens space for dialogue. The second closes the heart. As you reflect on these teachings, notice where you might be spending energy trying to change people who never asked to be changed. Notice relationships where frustration arises not from real harm, but from resistance to someone's personality. This does not mean tolerating genuine harm or ignoring necessary boundaries. It means distinguishing between harmless differences in temperament and actions that truly cause damage. Many relational conflicts are born from attempts to erase harmless traits that simply reflect someone's unique nature. In Buddhist understanding, every person is shaped by history, fear, memory, and limited perception. The person who irritates you is responding to life through filters formed by experiences you may never fully know. This does not make their behavior pleasant, but it can make it more understandable and therefore easier to meet with calm. When you practice accepting others as they are, you may discover that your resistance created more suffering than their personality ever did. The energy once spent trying to change them becomes available for appreciating whatever goodness they already carry. The monks and teachers in these stories learned that acceptance does not make you weak. It makes you wise about where to place your energy. Instead of exhausting yourself by trying to reshape people, you learn to respond skillfully to what is actually present. This realization brings quiet freedom. You can care for people without requiring them to be different. You can hold your values without demanding that everyone share them. You can feel irritation without believing that the world must change for you to find peace. Rest now in this gentle possibility. Relationships become lighter when you release the burden of fixing others. Love becomes clearer when it is not entangled with the project of improvement. Acceptance creates space for authentic connection in ways that resistance never can. The mountains where these stories unfold remain steady through sun and storm alike. They do not demand perfect weather. They simply stand, open to every season. This same steady presence is available in your relationships. Not by changing others, but by meeting them with quiet openness that allows what is best in each person to emerge naturally. Sleep gently in this understanding. Accepting others is not surrendering growth. It is recognizing what lies within your control and what does not. Often, true change begins not by reshaping others, but by transforming how you meet whatever they offer. In a monastery garden renowned for its beauty, there lived an elderly monk named Enzo. For 3 decades, he tended the land with extraordinary devotion. Flowers, vegetables, and fruit trees grew under his care, forming a living expression of harmony between human effort and nature. Visitors admired the garden as if it were a visible teaching of the Dharma. Enzo understood the subtle language of soil, light, and seasons. He knew when to prune, when to wait, and when to allow wild growth to unfold without interference. The garden responded with abundance and quiet elegance. But one autumn, without warning, an early frost arrived. Overnight, the temperature dropped far below what was expected. When Enzo walked into the garden the next morning, he saw that many delicate plants had perished. Late-blooming flowers lay dark and collapsed. Vegetables meant to nourish the community through winter were ruined. Years of careful planning seemed erased in a single night. As he walked among the withered beds, Enzo felt grief and anger he had not known for many years. All his skill, all his patience, all his knowledge seemed fragile before forces beyond his control. Other monks expected him to meet the loss with calm. They spoke of impermanence and natural cycles. Yet these familiar teachings felt distant and hollow. Losing a few plants was one thing. Watching an entire season vanish was another. For days, Enzo avoided the garden. When he had to enter it, he moved quickly, without his usual mindfulness. The sight of destroyed plants created a quiet ache in his chest. He told himself that attachment was the cause of his pain, but understanding this did not soften the pain itself. A week later, his teacher, Master Dogen, invited him to walk through the garden together. They moved slowly among the damaged beds. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, the master stopped beside Enzo's prized chrysanthemums, once vibrant, now fallen and darkened. "Tell me what you see," he said quietly. "I see loss," Enzo replied. All that effort reduced to nothing. "Look again," the master said gently. "What else is here?" Reluctantly, Enzo looked more closely. Beneath the dead blossoms, he noticed that many roots were still alive. Some hardy plants were already sending out new shoots. Seeds lay hidden in the soil, quietly preparing for future life. "I see that not everything died," he admitted. "And what else?" the master asked. Enzo looked toward the edges of the garden, where wild grasses and native trees grew without cultivation. They had survived the frost untouched. "I see that what truly belongs to this place endured." The master nodded. "The frost was not personal," he said. "It was simply weather arriving in its own time. Your suffering comes not from the frost, but from your expectation that nature should follow your plans." As they walked among the vegetable beds, Enzo noticed that underground crops had survived almost unharmed. Some even tasted sweeter after the cold. "I plan to harvest these slowly," he said. "Now I must gather them all at once." "And is that necessarily harmful?" the master asked. "It is different," Enzo said. "More work, less control. But the food remains." "Sometimes," the master replied, "difference is not disaster. It is simply another form of reality." As they walked, the master spoke of other gardens, other seasons, other losses. He spoke of droughts that revealed the value of water, floods that revealed which foundations were strong, and insects that revealed which plants had true resilience. "Every difficulty," he said softly, "reveals something that stable conditions conceal." Gradually, Enzo began to see the garden differently. He realized that the plants most damaged by frost were often those that required constant protection. They were beautiful, but dependent on perfect conditions. The plants that survived were less dramatic, yet more deeply rooted in the land. "I have been growing beauty without asking whether it belongs here," he said quietly. "And now," the master replied, "you have learned what endures." In the weeks that followed, as Enzo cleared the garden and prepared it for winter, his grief slowly transformed. Each dead plant became compost, feeding the soil for future growth. Nothing was wasted. Everything was changing form. More importantly, something shifted within him. He realized that he had believed, without noticing, that skill and effort could prevent all major loss. The frost taught him that some forces remain beyond control. When spring returned, Enzo planted differently. He chose more native plants, created simpler ecosystems, and prepared for uncertainty rather than hoping it would not arrive. The new garden was less spectacular, but more grounded. When frost returned years later, the damage was gentle rather than devastating. "The frost was a harsh teacher," Enzo would later tell young gardeners. "But it taught me resilience that years of easy weather never could." In Buddhist understanding, difficulty often reveals what is truly stable and what only appears stable under favorable conditions. Like the frost, life's challenges expose the difference between appearance and essence. Enzo's initial resistance was natural. The garden represented years of devotion. Its destruction felt like erasure. Yet his willingness to look closely at the loss allowed wisdom to emerge from pain. He learned not only about plants, but about expectation, uncertainty, and humility. Often, problems reveal where our approach requires adjustment. Success can hide limitations. Failure exposes truth. Human pain functions in the same way. Relationship struggles reveal patterns needing attention. Illness reveals neglected boundaries of the body. Work frustrations reveal misalignment between expectation and reality. pain does not have to be sought. But when it arrives, it can become a teacher if we are willing to listen. The frost damaged Enzo's garden whether he learned from it or not. Yet his openness allowed meaning to grow from loss. The middle way in Buddhism is not about seeking difficulty or avoiding it. It is about meeting reality without denial or obsession. Like Enzo, we can learn to cultivate lives that adapt to uncertainty rather than demanding perfect conditions. In a small mountain village, there lived a fisherman named Kenji. For 20 years, he worked the same lake, learning its rhythms, seasons, and subtle moods. Fishing was not only his livelihood, but his meditation. He understood where fish gathered, how weather shaped their movement, and how silence revealed hidden currents. People admired his consistency. Even when others returned with empty nets, Kenji often brought home food. But one spring, everything changed. Heavy rains altered the lake's ecosystem. Construction in the mountains shifted water flows. Fish that had lived there for decades vanished. Day after day, Kenji returned with empty nets. At first, he believed the change was temporary. He tried new locations, new techniques, new timing. Weeks passed without improvement. Practical worries arose, but deeper than hunger was the quiet collapse of identity. He had believed he understood the lake. Now the lake felt foreign. One evening, sitting beside the still water, Kenji felt close to despair. Years of knowledge seemed meaningless. The lake that had been his teacher now felt silent and distant. An elderly woman named Grandmother Hannah lived near the shore. She had watched his struggle quietly. That evening, she approached him. "The lake feels different," she said softly. "It is not the same lake anymore," Kenji replied bitterly. "Everything I learned seems useless." She asked gently, "What did you truly learn during all those years?" Kenji thought for a long moment. "I learned patience," he said. "How to observe subtle signs. How to adapt. How to remain still." "And do you still carry these qualities?" she asked. "I suppose I do," he said quietly. "But they do not bring fish back." She watched the sunset on the water. The plants that survived were less dramatic, yet more deeply rooted in the land. "I have been growing beauty without asking whether it belongs here," he said quietly. "And now," the master replied, "you have learned what endures." In the weeks that followed, as Enzo cleared the garden and prepared it for winter, his grief slowly transformed. Each dead plant became compost, feeding the soil for future growth. Nothing was wasted. Everything was changing form. More importantly, something shifted within him. He realized that he had believed, without noticing, that skill and effort could prevent all major loss. The frost taught him that some forces remain beyond control. When spring returned, Enzo planted differently. He chose more native plants, created simpler ecosystems, and prepared for uncertainty rather than hoping it would not arrive. The new garden was less spectacular, but more grounded. When frost returned years later, the damage was gentle rather than devastating. "The frost was a harsh teacher," Enzo would later tell young gardeners. "But it taught me resilience that years of easy weather never could." In Buddhist understanding, difficulty often reveals what is truly stable and what only appears stable under favorable conditions. Like the frost, life's challenges expose the difference between appearance and essence. Enzo's initial resistance was natural. The garden represented years of devotion. Its destruction felt like erasure. Yet his willingness to look closely at the loss allowed wisdom to emerge from pain. He learned not only about plants, but about expectation, uncertainty, and humility. Often, problems reveal where our approach requires adjustment. Success can hide limitations. Failure exposes truth. Human pain functions in the same way. Relationship struggles reveal patterns needing attention. Illness reveals neglected boundaries of the body. Work frustrations reveal misalignment between expectation and reality. Pain does not have to be sought. But when it arrives, it can become a teacher if we are willing to listen. The frost damaged Enzo's garden whether he learned from it or not. Yet his openness allowed meaning to grow from loss. The middle way in Buddhism is not about seeking difficulty or avoiding it. It is about meeting reality without denial or obsession. Like Enzo, we can learn to cultivate lives that adapt to uncertainty rather than demanding perfect conditions. In a small mountain village, there lived a fisherman named Kenji. For 20 years, he worked the same lake, learning its rhythms, seasons, and subtle moods. Fishing was not only his livelihood, but his meditation. He understood where fish gathered, how weather shaped their movement, and how silence revealed hidden currents. People admired his consistency. Even when others returned with empty nets, Kenji often brought home food. But one spring, everything changed. Heavy rains altered the lake's ecosystem. Construction in the mountains shifted water flows. Fish that had lived there for decades vanished. Day after day, Kenji returned with empty nets. At first, he believed the change was temporary. He tried new locations, new techniques, new timing. Weeks passed without improvement. Practical worries arose, but deeper than hunger was the quiet collapse of identity. He had believed he understood the lake. Now the lake felt foreign. One evening, sitting beside the still water, Kenji felt close to despair. Years of knowledge seemed meaningless. The lake that had been his teacher now felt silent and distant. An elderly woman named Grandmother Hannah lived near the shore. She had watched his struggle quietly. That evening, she approached him. "The lake feels different," she said softly. "It is not the same lake anymore," Kenji replied bitterly. "Everything I learned seems useless." She asked gently, "What did you truly learn during all those years?" Kenji thought for a long moment. "I learned patience," he said. "How to observe subtle signs. How to adapt. How to remain still." "And do you still carry these qualities?" she asked. "I suppose I do," he said quietly. "But they do not bring fish back." She watched the sunset on the water. "I have lived by this lake for 70 years, she said. "I have seen it change many times. Some fish disappear and return years later. Some seasons feel empty. Some feel abundant. How do you endure watching something you love change so completely?" Kenji asked. She answered gently, "I learned that loving the lake means loving all its phases, not only the ones that serve my needs. The lake has never existed for us alone. It follows rhythms larger than our desires." They sat together in silence as stars slowly appeared above the quiet water. Then Grandmother Hannah spoke again, her voice soft like wind moving across still water. "What if this season of difficulty is offering you a lesson that years of abundance could never reveal?" Kenji was silent for a long moment. "What could hardship teach me?" he asked quietly, "that success has not already taught?" She looked at him with gentle eyes. What has this uncertainty shown you about the way you hold your life? Kenji searched his heart honestly. It has shown me, he said slowly, that I relied too much on predictable results. I believed that skill alone could guarantee outcomes. When that belief collapsed, I felt lost. And what else? She asked. That I made my identity too small, he admitted. I thought I was only a fisherman. I forgot that I am more than what I produce. She nodded. And what have you learned about receiving kindness? Kenji lowered his gaze. I see now that pride made me resist help. I believed I was independent, when in truth I depended on conditions remaining unchanged. Grandmother Hannah smiled gently. So even the empty nets have been teachers, she said. In the months that followed, Kenji began to live differently. When neighbors offered support, he accepted it with gratitude rather than embarrassment. As he opened himself to others, he felt bonds within the village quietly strengthen. He learned new skills beyond fishing, discovering that flexibility could be as valuable as mastery. Most importantly, his relationship with uncertainty began to shift. Instead of interpreting unpredictable outcomes as personal failure, he started to see them as natural expressions of a living world that followed rhythms beyond human control. This change did not erase his longing for abundant catches, but it softened the pain of scarcity. Slowly, the lake began to change again. Fish returned, though not in the same numbers or patterns as before. When Kenji felt the weight of full nets in his hands once more, his gratitude was deeper than it had ever been. He no longer assumed that success was guaranteed. He understood how fragile and mysterious the balance of nature could be. Empty nets taught me humility, he later told young fishermen who came seeking advice. They showed me the difference between ability and control, between confidence and pride. They revealed strengths I did not know I possessed and limitations I had never seen. I would not choose to relive that time, but I would not exchange its lessons for anything. The fisherman's journey reveals something subtle about the nature of hardship. When life flows smoothly, we often believe our skills alone create our outcomes. Only when certainty disappears do we discover how deeply we depend on forces beyond ourselves, and how quietly resilience has been waiting within us. Buddhist wisdom has long recognized this pattern. We discover attachment only when what we cling to begins to fade. We understand expectation only when it is not fulfilled. We learn what truly sustains us only when familiar supports dissolve. In Zen tradition, such moments are sometimes called great doubt, experiences that unsettle old assumptions and open space for deeper clarity. When Kenji stopped seeing himself as someone who should be immune to uncertainty and began seeing himself as someone learning to move within it, his relationship with difficulty transformed. The empty nets became messages rather than verdicts, experience rather than failure, guidance rather than punishment. Grandmother Hannah carried the wisdom of many seasons. She had witnessed the lake through countless transformations and understood that what seemed disastrous within a short human timeline often appeared natural within a longer view of time. Her understanding did not deny the reality of hardship. Kenji's family still needed food. His skills still mattered. Practical solutions were still required. But she helped him see that suffering born from resistance, from believing change should not happen or that it reflected personal inadequacy, was not inevitable. When abundance returned, Kenji held it lightly. Success became something to appreciate, not demand. A gift, not a right. A moment, not a promise. Enzo the gardener and Kenji the fisherman shared a quiet discovery. Pain had revealed truths that comfort had concealed. The gardener learned to work with nature rather than against it. The fisherman learned to balance humility with skill and to prepare for uncertainty. Their lessons were not consolation prizes for suffering, but genuine wisdom shaped through awareness. Enzo's composting of dead plants offered a gentle metaphor. Raw experience, like fresh organic matter, must be allowed time to transform. When rushed or denied, it cannot nourish new growth. So it is with human experience. Healing often unfolds slowly, according to rhythms beyond our control. Between loss and renewal, there are quiet seasons of stillness where nothing seems to happen, yet everything is changing. Pain often carries information that pleasure cannot provide. Comfort reinforces familiar patterns. Discomfort signals where attention is needed. Like a fever that reveals imbalance in the body, emotional or spiritual pain often points toward places where growth is possible. This does not make suffering desirable, but when difficulty arises naturally, meeting it with curiosity rather than resistance can reveal guidance hidden within it. The empty nets taught Kenji humility, connection, adaptability, and patience. The frozen garden taught Enzo resilience, realism, and harmony with limits. Both men discovered that what they feared would destroy them quietly strengthened them instead. Let these stories settle gently within you now. There is no need to analyze them or apply them immediately. Like seeds resting in the soil, their meaning will unfold in its own time. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to celebrate your pain or pretend that suffering is beautiful. It simply reminds you that since difficulty is part of being human, approaching it with awareness and gentleness often leads to deeper understanding than fighting it with anger or despair. Your own experiences of loss and confusion carry messages about what seeks healing, what assumptions may need revision, what strengths are waiting to awaken. These messages do not appear through forceful thinking, but through quiet presence. Even the breath reflects this truth. Each exhale is a small release. Each inhale is a quiet beginning. Loss and renewal arise together, woven into a single rhythm. Nothing in this rhythm is wasted. Every moment of struggle, every feeling of being broken or lost, has been contributing unseen nutrients to the soil from which your understanding continues to grow. And now, as our journey turns gently inward, we arrive at something that seems simple yet endlessly elusive. The present moment. It is always here, yet the mind so often wanders to yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's worries. Zen practice does not drag us back by force. It invites us softly, like a hand extended in silence. Tonight, we explore how ordinary moments can become doorways to deep stillness when met with quiet attention. In a monastery hidden among forested hills, time was marked not by loud bells but by subtle sounds that invited awareness rather than commanded it. There was no grand hall of meditation, no elaborate rituals. Instead, practice was woven into everyday life. Brother Teacher had a humble duty he performed each day. Every morning and evening, he swept the main stone pathway connecting the monastery buildings. When he first arrived as a young man, he treated this task like work to be completed quickly. Sweep the leaves, clear the dust, finish the job, move on. He believed that true practice happened elsewhere, in study, in meditation, in silence. But one morning his teacher, an elderly monk named Jisho, spoke to him gently as he passed by. The path teaches many things. Jisho said. "Perhaps one day you will learn to listen." At first, Teacher did not understand. Yet out of respect, he began to sweep more slowly. In time, he noticed details he had never seen before. Dew clinging to certain leaves. The change in sound as the broom touched wet stone or dry earth. The subtle shifts in light across the path. His mind wandered often at first. Plans, memories, questions filled his thoughts. But gradually, something softened. He began to sense that the path changed each day, mirroring the rhythms of seasons and weather. What once felt like repetitive labor began to feel like quiet dialogue with the world. He also noticed his own mind. Some days it was clear and calm. Other days restless and heavy. Instead of judging these changes, he learned to observe them with kindness. One morning, something unexpected happened. As he swept fallen leaves in silence, his inner commentary faded. For several minutes, there was only movement, only sound, only presence. No past, no future, no sense of someone sweeping, only sweeping itself. The peace of that moment was simple, ordinary, yet deeper than anything he had known in formal meditation. When Jisho later asked about his work, Teacher tried to describe the experience. "It felt as if I disappeared into the act," he said. "There was no effort, no goal, only being." Jisho smiled. "And what did you learn?" "That presence is not something I create," Teacher replied softly. "It appears when I stop interfering with it." "Yes," the teacher said. "The path you sweep is also the path to awakening." From that day on, Teacher understood that enlightenment was not distant. It was hidden within the simplest acts, waiting to be revealed by attention. And as the night deepens, you may begin to sense this truth as well, that peace is not somewhere else, but quietly unfolding in the very moment you are breathing now. Her movements flowed like quiet water, each gesture gentle yet precise, as if the world had slowed to match the rhythm of her hands. Around her, the air felt lighter, and ordinary worries seemed to dissolve without effort. Yet Salito had not always carried such calm. Years before, when she first stepped onto the path of tea, she approached it the way she approached everything in her busy life, as a task to complete efficiently so she could move on to something else. She memorized sequences, studied forms, collected utensils, and mastered the technical knowledge required by tradition. From the outside, her practice appeared flawless. But something essential was absent, though she could not name it. Her teacher, an elderly woman named Yukio, sensed what Salito herself could not yet see. Again and again, she tried to guide her student beyond technique, but Salito was impatient with subtleties that produced no immediate results. She wanted mastery quickly. She wanted recognition. She wanted to teach others and prove her competence in this respected art. One afternoon, after Salito completed what she believed was a perfect ceremony, Yukio spoke quietly. "Your tea is correct," she said, "but you were not here while you made it." Salito felt confused and slightly wounded. "I followed every step," she replied. "My attention never left the forms." "Yes," Yukio said softly. "Your attention was on the forms. But where were you?" Salito did not understand. That day, Yukio offered an unusual instruction. "For 1 week," she said, "prepare tea only for yourself. Not to practice. Not to demonstrate skill. Not to improve. Only when you are thirsty and only to drink." The suggestion felt almost insulting. Silito had been working so hard to advance, and now she was being asked to step backward into simplicity. Yet she respected her teacher enough to follow the guidance. During the first days, the practice felt awkward and meaningless. Without the structure of formal ritual or the pressure of evaluation, she rushed through the process, boiling water quickly, using whatever cup was nearby, barely noticing what she had once tried so carefully to perfect. But slowly, something began to change. Without the weight of performance, Silito started to notice details she had never truly seen before. The subtle sound of water warming, from silence to faint whispers to a gentle rolling boil. The way steam rose and brushed against her face. The fragrance of tea leaves opening in hot water. The taste itself, which she realized she had often ignored while concentrating on correctness. One morning, as she prepared a simple cup of tea before the day began, she found herself moving more slowly. Not because she was trying to be mindful, but because the morning light, the quiet house, and the warmth of the cup made rushing feel unnatural. As she poured the water, her breath softened on its own. The familiar stream of planning and worrying faded. There was only warmth, scent, sound, and movement. For the first time, she was not thinking about making tea. She was simply making tea. When she lifted the cup and tasted it, the difference surprised her. The tea seemed richer, deeper, more alive. But beyond flavor, the experience carried a quiet fullness that her most technically perfect ceremonies had never achieved. That afternoon, she told Yukio what had happened. "I think I understand now," Silito said gently. "This morning, I wasn't trying to make good tea. I wasn't trying to practice correctly. I was just making tea because I wanted tea. And everything felt different." Yukio listened in silence. "When I focus on doing everything right," Silito continued, "part of my mind is always judging myself, checking each movement, measuring each step. But this morning, there was no judging. Only water, warmth, taste." Yukio smiled. "And how did the tea taste?" Silito paused, then answered softly. "Better. Not because my technique improved, but because I was actually there." "Now," Yukio said, "you begin to understand the way of tea." She explained that forms and techniques were not the essence of practice. They existed to free the mind from constant decision-making, so attention could rest naturally in the present moment. Over time, Silito's relationship with tea transformed. She no longer performed memorized movements. She participated in each gesture as it arose. The forms became a quiet framework within which presence could unfold. Anyone who sat with her felt the change. The atmosphere around her was no longer tense or performative. It became spacious, gentle, and calm. Students stopped feeling like observers of a demonstration and began to feel like participants in a shared meditation. "The tea ceremony is not about tea," Silito later told her students. "It is about being fully here. When you are present, tea becomes a doorway to awareness." Years later, as a respected teacher, she often spoke of the difference between appearing mindful and actually being present. "Many people work hard to look mindful," she said. "They move slowly, follow forms, and watch themselves carefully. But this is not presence. It is thinking about presence. True presence," she explained, "emerges when we stop trying to be present and start simply participating in what we are doing. It is the difference between watching yourself make tea and simply making tea. One is performance. The other is living." Salido carried this understanding beyond the tea room. She brought the same gentle awareness to cooking, cleaning, speaking, and solitude. Each ordinary activity became a quiet invitation to return to immediate experience. Her story reveals something subtle. Presence is not the same as intense effort. When Salido tried to make perfect tea, her attention was divided, part engaged in the task, part evaluating the task. This division created tension. When she stopped evaluating, awareness settled naturally into the experience itself. Presence, she discovered, is not something we force into existence. It is something that appears when we stop interfering. The traditions of tea, once understood, became gentle supports rather than rigid goals. Structure created space for stillness. Form became a container for awareness. Yukio knew that presence cannot be taught directly. It is already here, waiting beneath layers of commentary and judgment. The week of simplicity was not a regression. It was a return. When Salido began teaching from genuine presence, the atmosphere around her changed. Her calm invited others into calm. Her attention gave permission for others to be attentive. This insight extends far beyond tea. In meditation, people often try too hard to be mindful. They monitor every breath, every thought, every sensation. Yet this self-conscious effort can prevent the natural absorption that arises when attention simply rests. In conversation, listening to appear attentive feels different from listening with genuine interest. In work, trying to be mindful feels different from being absorbed in the task itself. Salido learned that presence is more like falling asleep than lifting a heavy weight. You create the conditions, then allow something natural to happen. When she stopped trying to make perfect tea, presence emerged quietly on its own. The monk sweeping the path and the woman preparing tea both discovered the same truth. Ordinary actions become extraordinary when met with wholehearted attention. Not because the actions change, but because undivided awareness reveals depths that scattered minds overlook. Daily life, once seen as a series of tasks, begins to feel like a continuous meditation. The breath itself teaches this lesson. Each inhale happens only once. Each exhale disappears forever. When attention rests gently in breathing, the simplest act becomes a doorway to stillness. The present moment is not a destination. It is the only place life actually unfolds. Past and future live in thought, but experience happens only now. Even reading these words is happening in this moment. There is nowhere else to go to find what these stories point toward. When presence becomes natural rather than forced, life does not change, but the way we meet it does. Work becomes intimate. Relationships deepen. Even difficulty becomes easier to hold. The path is already beneath your feet. The cup is already in your hands. The moment you have been seeking has always been this one. Not because this moment is perfect, but because it is real. And in fully meeting what is real, there is a quiet peace that thought can imagine but presence alone can touch. The present moment asks nothing of you except that you be here. And being here is already enough. As our journey continues, we turn towards something that touches every human heart, the attachment to results. We give our energy to work, to love, to dreams, and suffer when outcomes do not match our hopes. Tonight, we explore a deeper form of letting go, how to act with care while holding results lightly. In a small village, there lived a carpenter named Hiroshi. For many years, he had built homes and furniture with skill and devotion. He selected wood carefully, planned patiently, and shaped each piece with quiet precision. Yet beneath his craftsmanship, he carried a constant weight. He worried about how his work would be judged. He feared dissatisfaction. He replayed imagined conversations with clients long after projects were finished. Even while carving wood, part of his mind lived in the future, anticipating praise, criticism, or regret. One autumn, an elderly monk named Master Chin visited the village and asked Hiroshi to build a simple meditation bench. Then the monk said something unexpected. "I want you to build this bench," he said gently, "but I may never use it." Hiroshi felt puzzled. Master Chin explained, "My life is uncertain. I cannot promise that your work will be used as you imagine. I ask only for good work, not guaranteed outcomes." These words stayed with Hiroshi as he began shaping the wood. For the first time, he worked without the promise of a meaningful result. At first, the uncertainty felt unsettling. Why give such care if the result might never be used? Yet something deeper guided his hands. As he worked, he began to notice that the joy was not in imagining the future, but in the present act of creation. The smell of wood, the smoothness of grain beneath his fingers, the quiet satisfaction of precise joints fitting together. For the first time in years, his anxiety disappeared. Each day of work felt complete in itself. When Master Chin returned and saw the finished bench, he did not examine it critically. He placed his hand on the surface and smiled. "This was made with love," he said. Hiroshi asked how he could tell. "Love appears in attention," the monk replied. "In the smallest details. In the care given without expectation." And in that moment, Hiroshi began to understand that true freedom lies not in perfect outcomes, but in wholehearted presence within each act. "But I came to understand," Hiroshi said quietly, "that true work carries its own meaning. When you shape something with care, that care exists whether or not the result pleases anyone. The wood receives your attention. Your hands become more sensitive. Your mind learns patience, steadiness, and clarity. These gifts remain, no matter what happens to what you create. Now, when I work, I still wish for good outcomes. But I no longer depend on them to feel fulfilled. My satisfaction comes from the act itself, from being fully present with each movement, from offering my skill honestly to whatever lies before me." This shift in Hiroshi's heart slowly transformed more than his workshop. Those who bought his furniture began to sense something different. Even the simplest pieces seemed to carry quiet depth and warmth, as if they had been shaped not only by tools, but by attention itself. When asked about the change, Hiroshi would smile gently. "I learned to build for the joy of building," he said, "not only for the moment when the work is finished. When you cling to specific outcomes, part of your energy drifts toward worry and expectation. But when you release the need for particular results, your energy returns to the work itself. Often the results improve, but more importantly, the process becomes peaceful." His story reflects a truth that reaches far beyond carpentry. When we tie our sense of worth to outcomes, we often weaken the very actions that could lead to those outcomes. Anxiety divides attention. It pulls us away from what we are doing now and scatters our energy into imagined futures. But when we find meaning in the quality of effort itself, our attention becomes whole. Our actions become clear. Our minds become steady. Hiroshi discovered that holding results lightly did not harm his work. it refined it. His bench was shaped with greater skill when he was not afraid of judgment. His joy in craftsmanship deepened when he stopped measuring each piece against future approval. In Buddhist understanding, this is the essence of non-attachment. Clinging to results often obstructs the path to them. Desperation narrows vision. Fear tightens the hands. But when you act with full sincerity while accepting whatever unfolds, you often move with greater grace and suffer far less. Master Chen's request had quietly revealed a distinction. Caring about your work means giving it your full presence and skill. Being attached to outcomes means needing the results to justify your existence. The first nourishes excellence. The second undermines it. Hiroshi learned that fulfillment could arise from the process itself. Results still mattered, but they no longer ruled his heart. When work becomes its own reward, success becomes a gift rather than a demand. This principle appears in many corners of life. Students learn more deeply when curiosity matters more than grades. Athletes perform better when they are absorbed in the game rather than obsessed with victory. Artists create more freely when they are engaged with expression rather than recognition. Non-attachment also changes relationships. When Hiroshi stopped needing praise or fearing criticism, his interactions became natural and sincere. He listened more openly. He defended himself less. His work relationships softened into genuine connection. In a mountain village not far away, there lived a young woman named Midori. She devoted herself to growing vegetables for her community. She studied sustainable methods, learned from elders, and worked tirelessly with hope in her hands. Yet farming taught her a difficult truth. Much of life lies beyond control. Weather could erase months of effort in a single night. Insects might feast on her crops. Diseases could spread despite careful preparation. Even when harvests were abundant, markets might offer little reward. In her early years, these uncertainties filled her with anxiety. She watched forecasts obsessively. She worried over every leaf and stem. When difficulties arose, she blamed herself. Her fourth year was the hardest. Late frost destroyed young plants. Drought weakened what remained. Autumn rains ruined much of the harvest. By winter, Midori felt defeated. All her knowledge and dedication seemed fragile before forces larger than human will. During that winter, an elderly farmer named Kenji invited her to share tea and conversation. For many months, they spoke quietly beneath the cold sky. "You are trying to command what cannot be commanded," Kenji said gently. "You work as if perfect effort should guarantee perfect results. But the earth does not move according to human plans." Midori asked softly, "If I cannot control outcomes, why strive at all?" Kenji smiled. "Because skill and care still matter, even when they do not promise certainty. You learn to read soil, to listen to weather, to respond wisely to signs of change. These abilities have value, whether or not a harvest succeeds." He told her how he approached each season. "I plant with full attention," he said. "I use everything I know. But I plant knowing that some years bring abundance, some bring loss, and most bring something in between." Midori asked how he faced disappointment. "I grieve what is lost," Kenji replied. "Learn what I can, and begin again. Failure teaches as much as success, often more." Slowly, Midori began to see farming differently. It was not a battle to win, but a relationship to understand. Land, weather, plants, and insects were not enemies to defeat, but partners in a vast and shifting dance. I thought accepting uncertainty meant giving up, she told Kenji one evening. But now I see that acceptance can make action clearer. Kenji nodded. When you stop demanding that every season be kind, you can respond to each season as it is. Wet years call for one approach. Dry years call for another. Fighting reality wastes energy. Working with it frees energy. The following spring, Midori returned to her fields with a new heart. She still prepared soil carefully. She still planted with knowledge and care. But she held her expectations more lightly. When frost came, she protected what she could and released what she could not save. When rains arrived unexpectedly, she adapted rather than lamented. When pests appeared, she responded calmly rather than angrily. This change did more than ease her mind. She began making wiser decisions. Without fear clouding her judgment, she saw situations clearly. She learned from both success and failure. Her farming improved not because she cared less, but because she was no longer enslaved by outcomes. Over time, her relationship with the land transformed. It became a quiet conversation rather than a struggle. She still preferred abundance to scarcity, but scarcity no longer felt like defeat. It became information, an invitation to resilience, a reminder of humility. Letting go of guaranteed results, Midori later told younger farmers, does not mean caring less. It means caring in a way that can endure disappointment. When satisfaction comes from farming well, you can continue through difficult seasons without losing your heart. She learned that nature was not opposing her efforts. It was simply expressing its own ancient rhythms. When she worked with those rhythms, farming became cooperation rather than conflict. Years later, Midori was known not only for her crops, but for her calm spirit. When asked about her steadiness, she spoke of the difference between controlling outcomes and influencing conditions. Buddhist teaching echoes this wisdom. Actions have consequences, yet those consequences unfold within conditions far beyond individual control. You can shape outcomes through skillful effort, but you cannot command them through will alone. This understanding brings humility, and with it, freedom. Tomorrow will offer new opportunities to practice this letting go. New chances to act with care while holding results lightly. New invitations to find meaning in the quality of effort itself. And in that practice, something within you continues to deepen. Whether you notice it or not, whether others see it or not, whether it follows any timeline you might prefer, the path continues. Not because you control it, but because you walk it with sincerity. That is enough. It has always been enough. Now rest in this gentle sufficiency. As your breath slows, as your body softens into stillness, allow yourself to feel the quiet completeness of this journey. Through rain and uncertainty, through impermanence and compassion, through acceptance, pain, presence, and release, you have been exploring something deeply natural. The willingness to meet life as it is. Acceptance is not a final achievement. It is a practice you return to again and again. Each breath offers another chance to soften resistance. Each moment invites you to choose presence over struggle. You do not need to remember everything. You do not need to become perfectly calm. You only need to know that another way of meeting life is always available. A way that honors your humanity without being ruled by it. A way that allows feeling without drowning in reaction. The path of acceptance is walked quietly, one step at a time, one breath at a time, one moment of gentle allowing at a time. Rest now in this knowing. Let sleep arrive naturally, without forcing or resisting. Let dreams carry you softly through the rhythms of night. And know that when morning comes, acceptance will still be waiting, like an old friend, ready to meet whatever the new day brings with the same quiet wisdom that has held you through this journey into peace. Sleep well. And thank you for walking this path with Silent Monk.